It's hard to see how Seinfeld ever got its reputation as
the show is about nothing.
George and Jerry pitched their in-universe show that way.
Well, it's not about nothing.
No, it's about nothing.
But Seinfeld itself, it's a show about death and sex, race and religion, breast implants and soup. Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld genetically engineered the most morally reprehensible characters they could and spent 9 seasons seeing how much they could get away with. But there were a few lines they wouldn't cross, or more specifically, lines they weren't allowed to cross. Just how far is too far? Today we're taking a look at some jokes and storylines that got the kibosh to see if we can triangulate Seinfeld's moral compass. This is CanonBall. The first big test of the show's moral fiber would come in season 2 with an unaired episode called The Bet. This thing made it all the way to pre-production, but the cast and crew mutinied after a read-through and brought it to a screeching halt. The A story revolved around Elaine deciding whether or not to buy a gun. This touched upon 3 major social issues at the time: gun ownership in a city, gun ownership by a woman. Writer Larry Charles argued that nothing was off limits for Seinfeld, but director Tom Sharonis said, quote, "I was a gunnery officer in the United States Navy. Guns aren't funny." Well, that's pretty cut and dry. The cast also hated the episode, but for an entirely different reason. There was one joke that they found particularly tasteless. Elaine was to mime shooting herself in the head, exit wound and everything, and referring to that as the Kennedy. Okay, so JFK jokes, not funny, except they meticulously recreated the Zapruder film 1 season later.
I'm saying that the spit could not have come from behind. That there had to have been a second spitter.
Gotta admit, presidential assassinations are a lot funnier when you replace bullets with phlegm. Their moratorium on gun violence was both a good call and self-imposed. The next example, though, is where we start getting into network censorship. Season 4's The Airport ends on a surprisingly dark note, with George screaming for help after getting locked in an airplane bathroom with a violent criminal. But it almost got even darker than that. Elaine was the main punching bag of this episode, weathering the modern equivalent of trench warfare by slumming it in Coach.
Wake up, you human slug! Wake up! Wake up!
That guy who fell asleep? As originally written, he was straight up
dead.
But NBC said no way, because, well, why? Dead people aren't funny? That can't be right. Jerry killed an old lady with his pony remark in The Pony Remark.
What, the pony remark?
Way back in season 2.
You don't think I killed her?
And that kicked off a whole running gag of the gang accidentally killing people, sometimes on screen.
He's Superman!
NBC didn't necessarily mind making Elaine cuddle with a corpse. Their problem was that the episode was already a bit uncharacteristic, being the first in a while that didn't take place in their usual Manhattan stomping grounds. The rule seems to be no dead bodies on a vacation episode. Okay, so we've pinpointed where they draw the line on gun control and death. What the world really wants to know is, what are these characters' takes on racism? They wrote an entire episode to address just that, but they wisely decided to scrap it. Well, don't celebrate just yet. Not all racism was off the table. Don't forget about that season 9 episode where Kramer burns and stomps on the Puerto Rican flag, followed by a cartoonish mob of Puerto Ricans responding violently.
Dios mío.
It's a small detail, but according to the president of the National Puerto Rican Coalition, the clothes the mob wore, quote, had not been worn in 40 years. NBC apologized for their anachronistic racism if they accidentally offended anyone and pulled it from syndication. So, racism against Puerto Ricans, officially not funny. Except that this episode was the most watched of the entire series up to that point, so they put it back in syndication in 2002. Racism against Puerto Ricans is back on the menu. It may make you feel better to know that one producer said this story couldn't be racist because they thought about setting it during the St. Patrick's Day parade. That means racism against white people falls under a whole new category. Not quite funny enough. So what about that other race-centric episode that never got produced? We don't know the plot. All we know is that NBC would not allow George to observe that he's never seen a black person eat a salad, which is probably true. George hasn't seen black people do a lot of stuff. There were only 19 black characters in the whole damn show. Anyway, NBC recognized that their gaggle of white doofuses commenting on the eating habits of black people is officially not funny. So, what have we learned? Guns aren't funny, but it doesn't matter because assassination is even more not funny. Except for sometimes, when it's very funny. Corpses are funny, but only on the ground. Racism against white people could be funny, but we'll never know because racism against Puerto Ricans is very funny, except for 4 years around the turn of the century. Pretty simple stuff. Thanks for watching this episode of CannonBall. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments under which circumstances you think racism can be funny. Maybe don't do that. Can we turn the comments off, actually, for this one, please? Thank you.